Students of the King's College, we all know what it's like to feel weak, to feel powerless, to be ramen noodle poor. When you first moved to New York City, you probably thought you were about to influence the world, or at least some strategic institutions. But you soon realized there was a seemingly impenetrable barrier between your world and that world. You still had to pass college writing 1 and 2. You needed to boost your resume, even though your only experience was folding t-shirts at the mall and tutoring in math. Well, maybe not math. All the while trying to pay for an ever-increasing subway pass. But how could you prove yourself if no one gave you a chance? And how would you progress if you didn't have a voice? You see, Susan B. Anthony truly understood this feeling of imprisonment, of having no voice. You guys were able to go to school. We can get a job and work and save our own money to buy a subway pass, and we can intern our way to those influential jobs. But in Susan B. Anthony's day, the only way you could do those things was if you were a man. In her day, every single woman had to resign herself to powerlessness. You probably think America, land of the free, but that's not the America Susan B. Anthony experienced. She grew up in a land sustained by slavery, where alcoholic abuse and prostitution were growing problems. We even have women here at the King's College who work for organizations who stand against these issues. But in Susan's day, women didn't have a voice. Susan B. Anthony was a woman of compassion who wanted to help the oppressed, whether that meant helping alcoholics, prostitutes, or slaves. In the words of Psalms 82, she was a woman who maintained the cause of the weak and the fatherless and defended the rights of the poor and the oppressed. Women were certainly oppressed in Susan's day.
Susan's fiercely compassionate nature can be traced back to her childhood. Her parents were Quakers who treated everyone as a person of immeasurable worth. Her father owned a cotton mill, and as a policy, he absolutely refused to buy slave-raised cotton. When Susan loved and cherished her father, and he decided to homeschool her because he thought women were worthy of an equal education and thought that, well, Susan B. Anthony was worthy of learning long division, even though her school refused to teach it. I, on the other hand, was forced to learn long division despite my better judgment and asking not to. But however compassionate, Susan's father remained inflexible regarding the position of women in certain areas. The most qualified women in his mill were denied leadership roles. And in fact, at this time, women only had 5 career options and were paid only 1/5 the salary of their male co-workers. By the time she reached her 20s, Susan yearned to eradicate oppression on a widespread scale. She wanted to help wives abused by drunk husbands. She wanted to help women trapped in prostitution. She wanted to help slaves suffering at the hands of their masters. And while not all men encouraged this oppression, they were the only ones with a key to the ballot box and thus a political voice. And society at large was complacent. Susan knew if she wanted to stop oppression, she must first obtain the right to vote.
Susan B. Anthony was first introduced to the women's rights movement when her sisters and her parents attended the very first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York. There they heard the voice of woman call out,
"We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To secure these rights, governments are instituted, deriving their powers from the consent of the governed."
The history of mankind is a history of injustices and usurpations on the part of man toward woman.
He has endeavored in every way that he could to destroy her own powers, to lessen her self-confidence, and make her willing to lead a dependent and abject life.
This conference had been organized by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who Susan B. Anthony would meet 3 years later. Together, they would fight passionately for their whole lives to help a woman obtain the right to be able to vote and help end the injustices that were talked about by the woman in the convention at Seneca Falls that very day. Susan B. Anthony, she may seem like she was pretty fearless. I mean, after all, think about it. She delivered over 100 speeches every single year for 4 decades. She helped work with fugitive slaves during the Civil War. She wrote that it is a downright mockery to talk of women and their right to enjoy the blessings of liberty while denying them the only right and means they had of securing those liberties, the ballot. She was even arrested in 1872 when she helped lead a group of women in Rochester, New York, to vote illegally in that year's presidential election. But despite all the bold moves that Susan B. Anthony made for the cause of not only women's rights, but human rights, it turns out that Susan B. Anthony wasn't fearless. In fact, Susan B. Anthony had a tremendous fear of public speaking, kind of like all 4 of us. But because Susan B. Anthony believed in her cause so much, because she believed in her duty, she set that fear behind her. She put on her signature crimson red scarf. She grabbed the lectern in front of her and she spoke her heart out to the American citizens. Eventually, Aaron Sargent would propose an amendment to Congress about women's suffrage. However, that amendment was shot down. But Susan B. Anthony made sure that it was reintroduced every single year because for Susan B. Anthony, failure was impossible, which is why she kept fighting until her dying day.
On March 13th, 1906, Susan B. Anthony died in Rochester, New York. She was 86 years old and had never cast a legal ballot. At the time of her death, only 4 states had legalized women's suffrage. But Susan B. Anthony continued to be an inspiration even after her death. Over 5,000 women marched in Washington, D.C., and during World War I, they continued to picket the White House and fight for their cause. And then, in 1920, the 19th Amendment, the Susan B. Anthony Amendment, was ratified. This amendment, the result of a 72-year struggle, says, "The right of the citizens of the United States of America to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of sex." Susan B. Anthony was elected into the Hall of Fame for Great Americans. And in recognition of her hard work and dedication, the U.S. Treasury put her portrait on $1 coins, making her the first woman to be so honored. Susan B. Anthony said, "The day will come when man will recognize woman as his peer, not only at the fireside, but in the councils of the nation." Because of her life's work, that day has certainly come.